What's going on? I've read a lot of books in my life, a lot of nonfiction books, and there are many, many, many that have molded me into the woman that I am standing right now, sitting right now in front of you. But I want to take right now to talk about 3 in particular that I tend to go back to, either mentally or physically, pretty often. Now, I'll start with each one, and then I'll go through each one briefly and why I think each one is really good and worthwhile and really worth taking a look at or reading or spark noting or audiobooking. So the first one, starting off strong, is called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So this one, actually, I read in high school, and it was part of the reading list that we had to read in high school for one of my writing classes. And I would say it's one of the first philosophical books that I ever came across that kind of really touched me, and I didn't expect it to because it was a forced reading assignment. But this book is really beautiful. The main theme of it is it talks about a man in the Holocaust and him surviving the concentration camps and his experience with going through the Holocaust, and pretty much you're following his journey and his suffering, and he kind of takes you on a journey of what gets him through the concentration camp and what it takes mentally for him specifically to get through it. And I think it just speaks on a greater theme of finding hope in the places where you wouldn't think there is any. And somehow, some way, this man that went through the Holocaust was able to find hope and light through his family and through the people he loved, and that kind of carried him through. And I don't want to really spoil it. I probably did already a little bit, but it's just insane because he doesn't know whether his family is alive. He doesn't know anything, but just the idea that the people he loves could be is enough for him to really feel like it's worth it and for him to find the strength inside to keep going. And the whole book is kind of taking you on that journey, though what I find particularly great was the ending. So the ending is more of I think a big picture. I'm trying to find it. I bookmarked a lot. Oh, okay. So the final parts of the book is called logotherapy, and it's titled Logotherapy in a nutshell. Now, I don't remember exactly what logotherapy meant, but this short passage in the end of the book was really powerful. And one of the lines I really remember of it was an example the author gave of an old man and his wife, and they were very elderly, and I think the old man's wife passed away. And so the old man was trying to find ways to cope with losing the woman he loved and his wife, and he was just like so distraught, and he ended up figuring like, how can I keep on living knowing the person I love is gone and I have nothing else? And I think a therapist or someone told him, well, look at it this way, either she dies and you're the one carrying the burden of the suffering, or you would have died and then your wife, the person you loved the most, would have been the one carrying the burden of your loss. So the whole point was sort of finding meaning in suffering, which sort of speaks on the entire theme of the book, and ways to find meaning in whatever suffering you're going through as a way to find purpose and a way to keep you going. So this man was able to find meaning in losing his wife, in thinking, well, me being alive is me doing my wife, who I love so much, a favor, because I'm the one who has to carry now this burden of suffering. She doesn't have to carry that because she passed away, so I'm doing her this grand favor of continuing to live, and I was the one that sort of took this on, and that's the meaning of this suffering for me. The fact that I'm the one able to take on this suffering for my wife, and she doesn't have to be the one who has to live on knowing that I passed away. So that's all I'm gonna say about that, but this book is really phenomenal, and it's just a really great book to find strength in whatever situation, whatever challenging circumstance you ever go through in life. And I find myself always coming back to it whenever I'm really struggling, whenever I'm really going through something really hard and challenging that I can't seem to kind of get a grip on. I remember the message of this book and sort of just I remember the message that like there's always meaning in suffering, and if you can find that meaning, it's the light that could keep you going forward, and it's the light that can light you through the cave and get you through whatever you need to get through. So 1,000,000 out of 10, recommend. Perfect. The next book I'm going to recommend is a little lighter. It's not so heavy. It's this one, and it's called Manage Your Day-to-Day, Build Your Routine, Find Your Focus, and Sharpen Your Creative Mind. And this book is nice and light and practical. If you're a creative person and you enjoy art, writing, whatever creative endeavor, whatever passion you have, whether it's literally anything at all, this book is really, really good. And something I also always think about, because it's just a practical book that gives you a framework to follow to sort of strengthen your creative mind and give you discipline with following your passions. And it gives you a lot of really great examples, a lot of really great practical things, or I'm trying not to say the word things so much, but it just gives you a lot of practical steps to follow that you can really incorporate into your daily routine that could help strengthen your creative mind and help you continue finding inspiration in whatever creative endeavor you need. So one example this book gives in particular that I continue to remember is an example of this writer who's writing a novel. And if you think about it, people who write novels, they have to continue churning out these stories, and they have strict deadlines. And I can imagine how challenging it is having to churn out these books and find all this creative inspiration, kind of like on deadlines. It's not, you have to like force it out of yourself sometimes. So these writers are able to find are able to do this through routine, through discipline. And the way one writer does it is he builds a routine centered around sort of like a consistent day-to-day schedule. So he sleeps, I don't even remember, honestly, so pretty much the example I'm trying to give is there's a writer, and the way he goes about writing a novel is he'll do the same thing pretty much every single day throughout the period he has to write whatever book he's writing, and he doesn't change it up at all. And the purpose of doing the same exact thing every single day is sort of getting your mind in this flow state where you're not even thinking about what you have to do. You don't have to think about brushing your teeth. You don't have to think about when you're going to eat, when you're going to take a walk, when you're going to shower. It becomes such an everyday consistent thing that your body sort of runs on an autopilot where like wake up, brush teeth, eat food, take a walk, write. And the fact that he does this throughout the entire period of writing his book puts his mind in like a flow state where he's just able to like get in the flow immediately without any distraction and just kind of like churn out these books and churn out all these like writing and all these ideas, and it just becomes like an easy way for him to do that. So that's one example, and this book has like 1,000,000 of them. I just can't really think of it, but it's just really great for figuring out a way to kind of get in the flow and get your creative spark back if you have trouble keeping it around, because it can be fleeting, inspiration sorts and all that stuff. So the last book I'm going to talk about is the famous 4 Agreements by Don Miguel. This amazing little book. Me and this book, we go way back. And when I say way back, I mean like 2 years. And I thank my therapist mentally every single day for putting me onto this book, because this book changed my life. And it changed the way that I thought of things. And this book is really great, especially for adults who find themselves in patterns, find themselves stuck doing things, find themselves sort of like at the mercy of their default programming, or can't find a way to like turn certain things around. And Don Miguel in the 4 Agreements, he talks about agreements, and agreements means the agreements we make without our conscious choice when we're born up until whatever point in our life. So the set of rules that we follow. So if you think of it as the Bible has like 10 commandments, right? And people who follow the Bible, they follow the 10 commandments as a framework of how they're going to live life. And that's sort of like what guides them through life. And Don Miguel says that each one of us, we have our own commandments or our own agreements that we follow that we're not really always consciously so aware of. And those agreements that we have within ourselves, our subconscious, they guide us throughout our lives, throughout day to day, and they sort of provide that framework whenever we make a choice, whenever we make a decision, whenever we're doing things, we do things with that framework in mind. And Don Miguel talks about taking an inventory of your own commandments, so of your own agreements that you have in your mind that you might not be aware of, and bringing it to your consciousness and just seeing like, what's something that I follow, what's a rule that I follow that I am not really aware of, and do I agree with it? Do I want to continue following that agreement, or do I want to change it around? So if I'm having trouble with being a people pleaser, if I work really hard and if I'm a workaholic, if I keep exceeding expectations, why do I do that? Why do I do the things I do? And what are the underlying agreements that I've made with myself that are fueling me to do the things that I'm doing? And am I happy doing it? And am I happy with those agreements? So if I work really hard, am I working really hard because it's genuinely what drives me and what fuels me and I'm working towards my passions? Or am I working really hard because I'm seeking validation and I'm seeking some sort of reward? Am I seeking something outside of myself? Is that what's driving me? Am I feeling fulfilled, or is my drive leaving me feeling empty? And these questions could go really deep. So when I first read the book, I took an inventory of all the things, all the agreements that I've made in my own personal life. And the book has a second book, which is more like a workbook that honestly I really haven't gotten through, but it poses a lot of really great questions that gets you thinking. And I'll just read a few to get you thinking a little bit. Okay, so here's one. So one passage says, when you were a child, what did others tell you about what it means to be a girl or a boy? I was told that girls should always blank. I was told that boys should always blank. Did you fit the ideal image of what it meant to be a girl or a boy? What did you believe today about being a woman or being a man? I believe that a woman should always blank. I believe that a man should always fill in the blank. And yeah, then he just invites you to make a list of all the qualities that you were told you should have, both personal and physical. So I was told that I should blank, and I believe that I am blank. So just sort of, I guess, thinking about the expectations that were placed upon you by society, by the environment that you were in, and all the things that you were told you should be, what it meant to be a woman, what it meant to be a man, and what you ended up believing and what you took on into adulthood. And if you agree with that, if you believe that whatever people told you a woman should be is what a woman should be, and if people told you this is what a man is, and you grew up doing those things, trying to be a man, do you still believe those things are true? Do you believe that that's what it takes to be a man or a woman, or do you want to kind of change things around and kind of build your own framework of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man? And also the same thing with the qualities. If people told you these are the qualities you should have, do you believe that, or do you want to build more new agreements that better align with who you really are and who you feel and who's true and what qualities are more true to your soul? Because I think all of these things, everyone's different. We're all individuals, and there's no like one template for everyone. So I think it's easy to fall victim into feeling so distraught and feeling so lost when you're feeling like you have to force yourself to fit into this template that is supposed to be a one-size-fit-all for everyone on earth, when we're all individuals and we're all our own unique people, and we should be building our own frameworks and our own sort of template and agreements of what it means for us to be us authentically. So again, like just making a list. And I think this workbook, if anything, is really great because it just poses really great questions for you to think about and you to really sit on and marinate and kind of figure out what are you doing every day without your knowledge that's making you run on an autopilot. And do you want to change your autopilot? Do you want to like change things around, recalibrate things a little bit so you can run a little smoother and feel a little lighter? And yeah, so that book is really great too. So those are the 3 books that I would say are really amazing. I mean, I can't really stress enough how valuable I really think The Man's Search for Meaning book is. I think about it so often. Suffering is an irradical part of life. Even as fate and death, without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. Yeah. One of the things I've always had to come to terms with, and I try to remind myself really often, is yin-yang, balance. So everything has an opposite, and I tend to be someone who, by default, I tend to operate on extreme sides of a spectrum. So I'd often be really happy or I'd be really sad. And it can be really easy to want to experience joy and happiness and all the positive things all the time. And it's easy to forget that you need suffering, you need sadness, you need anger, you need darkness, because without those things, you wouldn't really appreciate the light, you wouldn't appreciate joy or all the positive experiences as deeply as you would. It's kind of like, I think of it as if it weren't the night, how could we know the day, if we never experienced nighttime, we wouldn't know the daytime. And if there was never darkness, how would there ever be light? It's like they both need each other, And for you to have one, you need the other. And finding peace with both sides of the coin is really challenging because, you have to be really strong. You have to face a lot of fears, and it's hard accepting that there's a dark side to the light side, and finding peace in knowing finding peace in knowing that the cup is both half full and half empty is pretty hard. But I think that's part of the trial and tribulations of life. Anyways, these are 3 of the books that I really like. You should check them out. A lot of my favorite books I gave away. Ooh, another good one that I do also think about that is really great for people who are struggling with sort of finding their purpose is Tuesdays with Morrie. That one's really great. That book is about a boy and his professor. I say boy, but he's a man. He had a professor in college, and once he graduated college, he ended up coming back and found that his old professor was dying of, I want to say, I don't remember actually what the professor was dying of, but he was on his final months of living. So the old student would visit his professor every single Tuesday up until he passed away, and he would interview his professor. I think it was sociology, his sociology professor, and he would ask him questions about life and sort of what he thought and any lessons he wanted to kind of leave behind, and his professor gave him all this really beautiful and insightful pieces of knowledge about life. And I can't really remember it from the top of my mind, but it was the messages he gave was so beautiful and so insightful, and it really gives you a sense of like what really matters, in life. Because I feel like when you're going on every day and you go to work and you come home and you have a family, you have all these responsibilities, you have all these bills, it's easy to sort of get sucked into all the things that maybe don't matter so much and lose sight of the big picture of what really does matter, which is like people, human connections, things that fulfill you, your passions, the things that make you happy. And a book like that, it really shows you to kind of stop for a second and really appreciate all those things, which was really great. Another book that really changed my thinking was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And that book is phenomenal for anyone who struggles with overthinking and sort of getting lost in their mind. it helps you detach yourself from your thoughts and sort of watch the thinker. So it helps you understand that you aren't the things that you think. You have all these voices in your head, and it's easy to sort of get sucked into all these voices, all of these judgments, and it's hard to sort of maybe ground yourself. So the book is really good in helping you understand your mind a little better and navigate your thoughts a lot nicely. So I definitely recommend The Power of Now. It was one of the first books I ever read in college that really entirely changed my thinking in the best way possible. And yeah, I think one really great exercise I remember when I first read the book was, I remember within the first, I think 10 pages, or maybe the first 5 pages, I was reading it in my college dorm room, and it said, try looking at a tree. So look out your window. I mean, it doesn't have to be a tree. Try looking at anything around you, right? Maybe there's a cup, your pillow, anything around you that you see, look at it without labeling it. So look at a tree without telling yourself it's a tree. Just look at it without any sort of label, without any sort of thought of what it is, and just look at it for what it looks like in front of you, which is like a brown, green thing outside. If no one told you it was a tree, what would you think of it? And it sort of brings back the wonder and the curiosity of things. It sort of helps you look at things through the eyes of like a young child that doesn't know what anything is. And when you were a kid, you sort of looked at everything with such excitement because you didn't really know what it was. You sort of just felt overwhelmed with and overstimulated with all these new things, and there weren't really much labels to associate anything with. You were just excited to just be around. So when you look at things without really labeling it, it pushes you to appreciate things that you get used to, things that you don't really think about too much, and it pushes you to sort of look at it differently. So if you look at a tree without thinking it's a tree, it looks more interesting. It just looks sort of like an alien thing that looks sort of foreign. If you look at a car without knowing it's a car, without thinking about it, it's a car, it looks a little bit more interesting because it looks like this giant metal thing on wheels zooming around like a mechanical beetle or something, you know? Like a bus, without knowing it's a bus, you could say looks like a giant caterpillar rolling with all these people inside of it. Things just seem more interesting, you know? So I think the book, The Power of Now, really challenges you to look at things a little differently and pushes you to step away from the things you get so used to that maybe make things feel a little mundane and things a little boring, which otherwise could feel really exciting and really curious. So that's what I would recommend. I'm always looking for books. I think I used to read a lot of nonfiction because I always seeked out ways to make things I always seeked out ways to look at things differently. And a lot of these books, these nonfiction books, these self-help books, any book about the brain and how the mind works, they're all really great because they challenge you to think of things differently than you would typically think of things. And it opens you up to different ways of looking at the world that you otherwise maybe wouldn't have thought of. And I think that's really amazing because, yeah, it just helps you see things differently with fresh new perspective. It makes things that are boring everyday stuff new and fresh and more lively. So I always gravitate towards books that are about the mind. One of my favorite things to read about is neuroplasticity. So brain plasticity, if you don't know what brain plasticity is, it's one of the most incredible things ever discovered. Even if you're not into science, pretty much brain plasticity is the ability of your mind to always change and learn. So there's this idea that as you get older, that you sort of slow down and your ability to learn new things sort of decreases, which is so wrong. When you're young, your brain is the most plastic. So it's easy for you to absorb everything because everything around you is so new because you're young and you're new in the world. As you get older and you get more experiences, your brain tends to get used to things and people think that when you get really old, you can't really learn anything new, but that's entirely from the truth, because your brain is like a muscle. So think of it this way. If you stop exercising, it becomes harder to like work out and be physical because your body's not used to it. So it's sort of like the same thing when you're growing up. When the more, as we get older, I think it's easy for us to stop doing things that are mentally stimulating. So it's easy to stop reading, it's easy to stop being active, it's easy to like really stimulate our minds because we get so used to everything. And when you stop doing things, when you stop stimulating your mind, it becomes harder to learn new things. So books that talk about the mind really challenge you to continue exercising your brain and treat it like a muscle, where you're exercising it as often as you can, so it becomes easier to learn new things, and you don't slow down, you don't decrease, you don't get all these things that typically the elderly do get, like loss of memory, or it becomes harder to do things, or it just becomes harder to think properly. If we continue to exercise our minds and really stimulate it with the things we love, it becomes easier to keep that up and have a really strong brain. And there's just so many amazing studies out there of scientists that I wish people talked about more in the mainstream, where the mind is just such a powerful tool. Like, there's all these studies that scientists do, and the placebo effect is one that you never really hear anyone talking about. But placebo is such an insane thing, because what a placebo does is pretty much, like an example, if you take an Advil, right? An Advil is supposed to relieve your pain. Now, if you think you're taking an Advil, but a doctor gives you a sugar pill, so a pill that doesn't do anything, but he tells you this is an Advil, it's gonna relieve all your pain, you're gonna take it and you're gonna believe it. So when you take the pill, regardless if it's an Advil or a sugar pill, you believe that this is gonna relieve all my pain. So there's all these studies of all these people that take these sugar pills, and the pill has no power, like it doesn't do anything, but because these people are believing that this pill is supposed to relieve their pain, their body literally relieves the pain because it believes it that much. And that's insane. There's also studies of a kid who's allergic of poison ivy. So the doctor blindfolds the kid and says, okay, I'm gonna touch you with a poison ivy leaf. The kid doesn't know, but the doctor tells him it's poison ivy. But the doctor actually touches him with a normal leaf that doesn't do anything. So because the doctor told the kid this leaf is poison ivy, the kid breaks out in hives. So even though the leaf is fully normal, it could be a piece of lettuce, the fact that the kid really believed that it was poison ivy had his body react and give him a full-on thing of hives, which is crazy. So things like that, which are just like super interesting, that I think is worth the world really thinking about. And it kind of just makes you think about like holistic healing and like all this other stuff that I wish was more incorporated in the medical world. And there's even like other studies. Like I think there's another book that really talks about this sort of stuff. I don't think I have it right now. Yeah, I can't find it. I read so much that I forget where I get my information from because it all sort of blurs together. But there was also a book that talked about soldiers that come back from war and soldiers that lose a leg, so they have to amputate parts of their bodies. So a thing that no one really knows, when a body part of yours gets amputated, your body forgets that it's not there because your body is used to having it there. So if you had to get an arm amputated, there's this phrase called ghost, like having a ghost arm. So there's oftentimes people who get their limbs amputated, they have these ghost sensations, so they feel like their hands are itchy and they have this sense to scratch their hands even though there's no hand because their arm got amputated. So doctors have to figure out a way to help patients relieve an itch that doesn't exist, which sounds insane, but it's like a real thing that happens. And they've had to come up with things to help people's bodies adjust to not having a limb anymore. So they've had to come up with exercises to help them not feel that sensation anymore where it doesn't exist, which is crazy, which also kind of reminds me of another exercise on the same topic where you could have your body think anything is an extension of you. So there was a study that, if I remember correctly, there was a table and the doctor told the person to put their hand under the table, and they said close your eyes, and they sort of walked them through a thought experiment where the person was like touching the person's arm and then touching the table or something of that nature. And eventually the person, whenever the doctor touched the table, the person felt like their hand was being touched. So they felt the sensation from the table. So they felt like the table was a part of their body, which is crazy. Like, you can have your mind believe that someone touching a table equals them touching your body. So it's like things like that with the mind that is just like insane, that I think if we thought about further, we could really find ways to utilize to our power. And that's just sort of stuff that just really like gets me thinking, and I call it thought candy. It's from an author, Dolores Cannon. She's great. She does like hypnotherapy on patients, and this kind of gets into more of like the spiritual cuckoo things that I think is really interesting. But she talks a lot about hypnotherapy, and she calls this sort of stuff thought candy. So like candy for your mind, and I love that word because it's so true. But there's all sorts of stuff too, you know. On the topic of things that happen, studies that happen that sort of go under the table, there's also a lot of clinical testimonies about life after death. So there's actually a book called Life After Death, which is one of my favorites also. And the book talks a lot about what happens after you die and all these people that have had near-life death experiences and their testimonies. And the book is just a collection of all these interviews, and they've noticed consistencies with all these people who have had these near-life death experiences. And it's just so insane to read about, because again, it's something people don't talk about, but it really poses the question, like, is there really like something after we die? Like, do we have a soul? Like, do we go somewhere? Like, is there something more beyond this? And a lot of these stories, you'll find that there's people who die for a few minutes on a hospital bed, and the doctors are giving them surgery, and then they're able to, when they come back to life, they're able to tell the doctors exactly what happened when they were unconscious. They know what everybody was wearing. They know what procedures were being done. Like, they can name everything that happened in the room as if they were standing above everybody. And the doctors are like, oh my gosh, like, how could you possibly know that? You were knocked out. Like, you were just not alive. You were gone. But these people saw everything that was happening to them, and they were just like, yeah, I was in the room. I was looking at all you guys. I was above my body. It was crazy. And I don't know, it's easy to dismiss that sort of thing, you know? I think I saw on TikTok that, reliable source, I saw on TikTok that recently scientists also discovered that it was possible to talk to people through your dreams. So they were able to finally prove, because there were always all these like testimonies and people saying this was the case, but I think science recently proved it, that two people actually communicated with each other through their dreams, which is crazy. Like it just dismisses so much information. Like, it dismisses a lot of the things we were told, that dreams are just hallucinations of the mind, like dreams have no inherent truth to them. But the fact that two people were able to communicate to each other via two separate dreams kind of like dismisses all of that, and sort of poses the question of where do we go when we're sleeping? Like, what really happens? Like, what are we really experiencing? And is it possible to talk to other people outside of our bodies? Is it possible to astral project? Is it possible to communicate with others through our dreams? And where is our dreams? Where do we go? Like, where is that magical place? And it makes things that seem like fiction not really fiction anymore. I know I sort of went off on like a million different things, but like all this stuff is so interesting, and these books, they get you thinking. They get you thinking about all this stuff. So if you want to think more about this stuff, read these books. because it's pretty crazy. It's great. Anyways, the reason I love all these books too, and all these like things that I'm talking about, is because it makes you really think about it. And whenever you're in bed and you're like, what am I doing? What's the point of all this? What really matters, you know? Reading stuff like this and thinking about this sort of thing sort of helps you remember like what really does matter. And if you feel a little stuck, if you feel a little lost, write it down and see where you should change things up a bit. And maybe you gotta change up your routine. Maybe you gotta read something new. Maybe you gotta talk to new people. Maybe you gotta do something a little different to get you going again. Or maybe you don't wanna do anything at all. Maybe you just need some rest. And the last thing you need to do is do something. Yeah, life's a crazy place, so I hope this information made it a little bit easier or something. See you later.